Hello and welcome to the OWASP DevSlop Down Under edition. Thank you for joining us bright and early on your Saturday morning, or whatever time it is for you wherever you are in the world. Today on the show, we are super excited to be talking with Sarah Young, who is a senior cloud security advocate at Microsoft, about guardrails. What are they? Why do you need them? Why might you want them? What can you do with them? Today with me on the show, we have the usual suspects, James, Mimi, and Beck, as well as Sarah. Welcome, everyone. How you doing?
Hello.
Doing well.
Doing well?
It's nice and early. It's Saturday. I'm vibing. Here we are.
It's good. You got your coffee?
Yeah. I do have coffee. I almost didn't have coffee, but my lovely husband came and made me one because I'm running late.
Oh, sounds awesome.
Yes. There you go. So Sarah, what is up? Tell us all about it. What are these guardrails you speak of?
Oh, yeah. Where do we even start? Okay, guardrails, they it's not like it's a new term, right? It's been around for a while, but guardrails are essentially the idea that we put some guardrails in place to stop people doing some really dumb stuff. Let's say dumb things. And maybe that's the wrong, because that's a bit of shaming, and I don't mean to shame. The fact is, we provision things, people build things, devs or infrastructure people or whatever. And from a security perspective, because we know how wonderfully easy it is to run things up in cloud, we can go boom, 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 boom. I've created a database, I've created a web app, I've created a virtual machine. But, how have you configured it? What's in it? Is it internet facing? Is it a storage account? Let's take the most basic famous one that everyone knows. Have I just spun up a storage account that is just open to the internet? It doesn't matter whose storage account it is. That's a silly thing that we want to avoid happening. So the idea with guardrails is, and in its most basic form, the idea is that we think about in our environment, what are the things we really don't want people to do? And that can be, I'm talking about it more from a security perspective, but in fact, guardrails can go further than that. Can be security, can also be billing and cost. Do we want people to spin up a super, super, super expensive resource that's costing you like $100 a second or whatever? Because, you're going to have a bad day, or the billing people are going to have a bad day and come, a month down the line when something's been running for a month, no one realized, and you end up with a massive bill. So basically, guardrails, the idea that we stop that happening. Now, we can be more prescriptive and you can be more or less sort of harsh with it. So we could say, hey, the following things we do not allow. We do not allow. So a really straightforward example I usually give is like deploying in particular regions. So say if you're a European company, because let's face it, Europe has the EU has the strictest rules on these things. We don't want to deploy to Australia or Southeast Asia. You need to keep your data physically within the EU. So we can stop that with guardrails. And I work for Microsoft, so I will show you some Azure stuff, but the principle is the same no matter what cloud you're using. And all clouds have sort of similar controls that you should be, making sure you don't do things you shouldn't. It's definitely a maturity thing. It's a journey. I think most people will, when they're starting off with this, might not even know what the guardrails should be. So it's definitely like a learning and talking and things you can build up with time. But usually there's a couple of easy ones that everyone can put in. So, we only deploy to this region. We don't deploy things publicly to the internet by default, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what guardrails are. Super important, but often overlooked, sadly, for new and shiny things because they're not particularly sexy, right? And if they're not done well and they're not well thought out, they can also be frustrating as well. So you need to think about the experience as well. They need to be planned.
Yeah. And do you think that guardrails are more important than ever now that we have DevOps situations going? So developers now have control of things that are going on in ops. And it kind of sucks for people in that role because now they're expected to know about so many different things, not to be patronizing, but it's really the reality of the role where Now you have control of infrastructure and you're supposed to be spinning up infrastructure, and maybe there's certain things that you don't know you're not supposed to do. So it's almost like, I feel like having that, I liken it to like when you're bowling and you have the little ramp, or like you put up the things on the gutter. Like, because like I'm not very good at bowling, so like I like to have the little ramp. It makes me feel safe, and I know that I won't hit a gutter ball, so at least I'm playing and coloring in the lines. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's to do with coloring in the lines. It's keeping you to stop making a massive mess, basically. And it, like I said, I always talk about it being that's my job more from a security perspective, but it actually is wider than that. It's more operational too. It can be cost, it can be just consistency of deployment within your environment. Because I remember years ago, a customer I worked with in one of my previous jobs came to me and they were like, is there any way we can just stop people deploying just random stuff? I'll try and like tone down my language, because that may be not the language that was used. Because they said our tenant is just a wild west. There is all kinds of stuff in there because people just go in and they spin up whatever the heck they want, and we don't know what's there. We don't know if it's consistent, and guardrails are a way of stopping that. And as I said, you can be more or less prescriptive. So you can, for some things, you can say, no, you cannot do this. Sorry, it's not happening. We're blocking it. But you can also have guardrails that are less prescriptive. So it might sort of just create an alert that goes to an operational team or a security team, whatever's appropriate, saying, hey, FYI, so-and-so just did this. You might want to double check with them that they actually need that. Obviously that creates a bit of overhead, so you've got to balance that sort of stuff, but you don't have to just be no. That's the point. And it can be nice as well that you can, at least in the Azure implementation, for a start, you don't pay for it, which is sweet. It's actually a free tool, so it's nice for that. And you can actually put a little message, I'll show you in a sec, and you can basically say, well, I like to put in my demo like lol no, but like you might want to put something slightly more prescriptive than that, like
explaining to someone like maybe why they can't do something or who to talk to.
Yeah, rather than it just saying, no, you can't do this, you can actually put like an explanation. So like you said, if there's a dev or, devs doing ops and they deploy something they don't realize they're not allowed to deploy and it gives them an error, you can actually be more verbose. And rather than just say no, computer says no, which is going to annoy everybody. And it's not a good experience. And it's not exactly, making devs and security work more closely together when they're just like, I'm trying to deploy something and it just says no. You could be more verbose. And I mean, the idea is, of course, that you should have had a few discussions about what you can and can't do, and hopefully nothing should come as a shock. But not everyone knows everything. And I think but still, it's a good way to do things, I think. But it's definitely a maturity thing. It's a journey. Like, a lot of organizations, and I'm sure you can think about examples yourself, they don't know what they don't want to do sometimes, and because they haven't sat down and thought about it, or they have a few ideas, or maybe they've been burnt, so they know because of that some of the things they don't want to do. But that thinking about, I mean, it's essentially baselines and going back to kind of in pre-cloud, it's talking about like machine baselines and templates and things like that. It's essentially that, but a bit more dynamic in cloud, and it goes across more things.
I feel like what I'm also... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I feel like for myself as an AppSec engineer who, like, at work doesn't spend a lot of time in cloud infrastructure, I really value having those guardrails in place, because there are a lot of times where I'm completely out of my depth, even as a security engineer. And the fact that like our cloud specialists, the people who work with this stuff day in, day out, have said, these are the parameters in which you're allowed to build things and you can play and you can do all of these things. It just takes so much stress away from me, because like I'm not going to cause an incident. No one's going to get paged. I'm going to have like an opportunity to fix something before like it actually goes wrong. And I've actually had nightmares about like not having guardrails in
My
place
God,
and
same.
being raided.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my God, not that far.
And like, I think, I feel like it says how I feel like that's a really good explanation for how I feel about like accidentally coloring outside the lines at work.
Yeah.
But I think like they're also really helpful for security people who need to do things that they're not doing every single day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I often comment on that myself because like it's in my job, you know, I do one thing, but I also do engineering. And so like I'm spinning up infrastructure and building platforms to support my work. But I always say this, I'm like, I'm not an SRE, I'm not a cloud person. Like I know what an EC2 instance is or like, you know what I mean? And I just want to make sure that I'm doing things securely. And so having those guardrails helps me feel more safe.
And cloud is so easy. Like you can tick the wrong box, right, in the UI. I mean, hopefully you're probably using a pipeline or something, but say you're doing it in the UI, and you can tick the wrong box, and you can, you know, it can just be, does this have external access? And you check it or uncheck it, you know, depending on what it says. You can create something that's really insecure purely by accident with one click, and that. Yeah, it's hard, right? And you know, I've deployed something and hit some guardrails, and you're like, oh yeah, sorry, didn't mean to do that.
The other thing, the other thing there is also that if somebody does get into your environment maliciously, you have an account that's compromised, that kind of thing, it really limits the damage that someone can do there. So you're also, it's not just a dev measure, it's also a security measure for your actual environment. It means that folks can't do too much damage once they get in if you've set it up the right way.
Yeah. And that's like touching back on what you said, Sarah, about the alerts. Like in my day-to-day job, we have guardrails in place that don't necessarily prevent, but they, like you said, alert. And we've set up things so that we can make sure that it's a seamless or streamlined experience for the person doing the work. So maybe they'll just get a prompt for step-up authentication, or maybe they'll get like a message that says, like, did you mean to do this? Because it's slightly anomalous, but it's not bad per se. And so we just want to kind of double check.
Yeah, exactly. And because I know like one of the things I didn't appreciate maybe in the early days when I worked in security, I mean, I've been around it long enough now, but I used to, in the very early days when I joined security, like 10 years ago, you see things very black and white. I was like, no, you can't do this, you can't do this. But then what you don't appreciate, but then when you think about it more, and probably just you spend more time in the industry, you're like, security will never win out against other business priorities. So like you might need to deliver a thing. And if you don't deliver it on time, it's going to cost the company, I don't know, like $10 million, whatever it is. And if security is just stopping things, or it's seen to be stopping things and stopping productivity, people just go around it or they ignore it. And so something I've really learned to appreciate and I'm really passionate about now is that security mustn't get in the way of people doing their jobs. And it's really, and I get that we don't want people to do the wrong thing. We don't, but it's securities, and security used to a lot, and you still see pockets of it, but I think we're getting so much better, where security was empowered just to be like, no, you can't do this, go away, you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. And it would drive people up the wall, whereas now and they had no responsibility to try and make things work. They could just say, no, not my problem, go away and do it better, which obviously didn't make security super popular, because why would it? And you know, business prevention. My dad, I remember when I told my dad I started working in security, and my dad's retired now, and he didn't work in IT, he worked for a bank, and he worked in sort of leadership roles, and he understood tech, but he was kind of not super technical. And he was like, oh, security, the business prevention officers.
Yes.
And I was like, yeah.
It's really funny because I feel like as a security engineer, I want to be bothered the least number of times in my day so I can like go and do the things that I've like all of my Jira cards. I want to go focus on them. I would love more guardrails so people stop coming and asking me questions. Like, I love talking to you, don't get me wrong, but also I would just love some time to like do focused work. And I feel like guardrails help do that. It's just like, And I think that might be, you know, the more modern like step that we're taking, where security no longer their job is no longer just to say no, it's to actually go and do their own work. And so I feel and so I also like this idea and the way that we're moving, because it just means like I don't have to have ad hoc conversations all the time. Like I know that everyone can go do it and it's fine. Sorry, Mimi.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one other thing that I think is really important to mention is that when security says no and makes things difficult, people will find another way. And that's how you get an unauthenticated API exposed to the internet, because
that would never happen.
That would never happen. But that is a recipe for disaster, because you're not empowering people to do their work. They have stuff that they have to do. So you can't just say no. You have to provide a safe way to do said thing.
Yeah, you want shadow IT? This is how you get shadow IT.
Exactly.
And this. Oh, Sarah, you go. Sorry.
Oh, I know. It's just I know that there's probably something I can't repeat, like on live thing. But one of my favorite ever memes going around. You probably remember that. I'll retweet it again afterwards. Because it's one of my favorites. You know the mocked up study books, and there's one that's called "What the F is Security? How to Ignore It and Deliver Your Project." The project.
The fake O'Reilly books.
I love
the fake O'Reilly book, and it's actually my favorite because I'm like, it's so true. They're like, how do I? But it's so true that is typically what was typically the mindset, because the fact is that you can't just say no, because people have got to get stuff done, and the business has to get stuff done, and the business or the organization, it doesn't have to be business, right? The organization that pays for security, pays your salary, still has to do whatever its mission is, you know, whether it's making money or whatever. And you have to help people do that. So and I think guardrails are a good way of, because as well, we talk about with DevOps, and I talk about this a lot, like, for someone who I technically have a technical role, spend a lot of time talking about people's feelings.
Honestly,
when I did governance, this was 90% of doing a gap analysis. It wasn't actually talking about anything technical. It was like, tell me how you really feel about how this works.
And
so stakeholders. How would you feel? Like, what are your feelings? And would you like to express them to the development team? Development team, I want you to just sit here and hear what they have to say. And then
you'll get a chance to talk.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, because doing the whole DevSecOps thing, I mean, I think that, honestly, I think technically the technology, and I know I oversimplify a little bit, it's actually quite straightforward. The bit that's hard with DevSecOps is people's feelings. And so security, essentially, they need to let go a bit. And security traditionally didn't do that, right? We went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. We're like, we're going to check all your things before you can deploy it. Like, and I'm going to do a code scan. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And before we've done any of that, it's not going near production. Whereas DevSecOps and DevOps, essentially security has to let go a bit and say, okay, we're going to trust you to do the right thing, which is like 20, 30 years of not doing that. So it's like devs have to step up a bit, but also security have to let go. But who goes first, chicken and egg? But guardrails,
it's interesting
that is a way.
It's interesting you say that, Sarah, because like that term, like DevSecOps, is obviously an evolution of DevOps, right? Which in of itself was a similar movement that happened in kind of like the operations sysadmin space. And I sort of loosely feel like the way that security is being approached in sort of like the contemporary sort of time is almost like maybe 5 or 6 years behind how system operations and like network and system engineering had a bit of a transformation with DevOps, because a lot of these same paradigms exist, right? Like in sysops, right? Like you have people who could write code that makes your servers slow and catch fire, and that directly impacts your day and your ability to deliver reliability to the business, right? And so DevOps and a lot of the tooling like infrastructure as service, etc., came out of that need to actually like stop saying, no, you can't have a server, no, you can't have more memory, like fix your code, and actually empowered people to spin up their own infrastructure, but giving you the like opportunity to put those guardrails in. It's like that exists in the form of quotas on clouds, right? Like this project can only have a gigabyte of memory for their project. And I don't know, I feel like that's kind of taking the quotas concept and applying it to security controls. And I feel like it benefits everyone, right? Like it stops that breakdown of communication. It stops that, that sort of contempt that used to be so pervasive between
synergy.
Synergy.
Sorry, Sarah, you were making a point about how guardrails mean that we don't have to be the mediator, I think.
Yeah, it's so I think the other thing is because that security letting go, devs stepping up is definitely that's a journey. I'm going to use like lots of the cheesy words, but it's true. It's not something that happens overnight. But I think that using guardrails is a way of security saying, right, okay, here's a list of the things that you absolutely cannot do, like, because it's really bad. Buzzword counter, nice. Like, these things you cannot do. This is, like, and, you know, it might be 10, 15, 20 things. Like, from a security perspective, we absolutely cannot let you do them. So it could be, you know, storage account open to the internet. That's probably a good one to have in there. It's not, and then it might be, here are the things that we're going to check with you if you do them. So it just essentially is saying, because security, like I said, it's a mindset shift inherent, you know, have spent so long distrusting the rest of the IT business. It's a difficult thing for, and you know, again, it's slightly personality. As I said, this is all psychology. I should go like study psychology because it's not about tech. The tech's straightforward. It's about, you know, people letting go of that. I can't trust anybody else in the business to do the security right. We have to check everything. So by saying, hey, there are these guardrails, this is how we can stop you doing something terrible.
So, Sarah, there was a comment earlier in the chat. Someone was saying, where was it? That's right. I was thinking about guardrails like the old sysadmin management VLANs for infra. What do they look like? I know you have some stuff in Azure that you would like to show us, because I feel like we've been talking about this theory about this. I'd really like to see how you actually go about configuring this stuff.
Yes, demo time.
Please, demo time.
So hopefully you can all see my screen there. Let's do a bit of that.
Can you see my screen?
I will zoom in a little bit just because I know sometimes it doesn't present amazingly well. Yeah. So in Azure, you will go to, we call it Azure policy. Let me hide where it says StreamYard is sharing your screen as well. Let's get rid of that. So you can see here, this is Azure policy. This is where we do guardrails in Azure. As I said, all the other cloud providers have equivalent. So I've got a couple in here. Now, I've actually done one because Azure policy takes a little while to deploy. That's just how it works. I did do this before we started. But you can see here, I have made one called allowed locations. So if we have a look at my definition, it's actually, look, I'll show you in a minute. Like, you can see it's all in JSON here, but that doesn't really matter.
JSON.
I know, JSON. But
I love JSON.
It's actually, what it's basically saying is I can only deploy things to a specific region in Azure. Now, I will show you if I was going to do another one. As I said, I already deployed this earlier just because it takes a little bit of time. But I will basically, you pick a subscription. So I'm going to do it to everywhere. Oh, Sarah, you're doing this wrong today. Joy. You know when you're like, I literally did this, like...
yeah, but now it's live, so you have to...
Yeah,
it's just a
watching you.
Yeah.
Sign a policy. Because I only did this like half an hour ago, and I've done it a billion times, and then my mind goes blank. I'm
The demo gods laugh.
Yeah. So what we do is we pick a scope. So what that means is you pick a subscription. Look, I've called them all Contoso, Microsoft's, that's what you call everything in Microsoft land.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's deep lore. Nice.
So Microsoft, interestingly, if you ever see demos done by Microsoft people, completely random fun fact, they will be called things like Contoso or Tailwind Traders or there's so many of them. So in Microsoft, we actually have a list of official demo
fake business names. Nice.
I'm pretty sure you can like find it.
You'll see Contoso a lot. So I usually use Contoso. So we can pick a subscription. We can optionally select some resources within that subscription that we don't want the policy applied to. And then we do our policy definition. Now, I'm going to keep it nice and easy. So you can see here, Azure has you can see 1,654 built-in policies. So these are typical things that you might want. I won't show you all of them. Obviously, that's not going to work. But you can see here we've got things like Azure Edge Hardware Center should have double encryption support enabled. Let's see what else is interesting. Restrict the use of open source software, which I'm not saying is interesting. So there's all kinds of things in here. They've tried to build up like a ton of common ones that people would use, so you don't have to write them yourself. But of course, you can write them yourself as well, of course, because built-in things isn't going to suit everybody. But the one that I did, though, that I already deployed, just to show you, is like allowed locations. Now, because I've already deployed it, it's not coming up in here. But things like for Cosmos DB, you can restrict where they're deployed to. So anyway, I've done a more general one than that, which is just generally deployed locations. So you can see I've got some non-compliant things. That's because I applied this policy retrospectively onto this subscription. So it's telling me I've got some non-compliant things. I've got lots of non-compliant things, actually.
Naughty.
Naughty. So it's very naughty, I know. But what we can do here is we can view the definition. We can delete the assignment. So just delete the policy. We can edit it. We can also duplicate it, because you can get quite granular. The reason you've got all these options is because I've deployed this to a particular subscription. But of course, this is a demo environment, so it's not got loads. But you might not want the same policy across everywhere. There are some things that you may need across everywhere, but you can be more granular and mix them up a bit as well, because that's the reality. But you can see here, if we have a look at my, it's going to show me, if I click on here, all of these things. You can see here, non-compliant, because Sarah's got a lot of non-compliant things here. And that's because they're not in the right region, right? And you can see the other thing that's worth showing here is the effect is deny. Now, because I've retrospectively done this, it's just highlighting to me where I'm non-compliant. But if I try and deploy something new, the idea is it should stop me from doing it. So let's have a go. So here you go. It's Demo Gods. We'll see if I just spin up. What should we do? Let's do a virtual machine. Let's do something nice and easy. Create a virtual machine.
This is great for me because I haven't used Azure in ages.
There you go.
So many good and useful UI options.
Yeah, no, Azure is, and I'm just gonna, what did I? I'm gonna put it in there. I'm gonna put it in America. DevSecOps. Now, this is just, like I said, it doesn't really matter what I'm actually deploying here. That's not really the point. As I said, it doesn't really matter what. The point is I'm deploying it in the US. So what I'm hoping, and you see, for those of you who haven't used Azure, by the way, because I know obviously there are other clouds out there. The nice thing about Azure, and I did work prior to Microsoft on other clouds, is that Azure's very nice and UI based. Now you can do it all with code as well, but if you're kind of not super comfortable with doing code and you're new to cloud, I think that the Azure UI is very, very user-friendly and self-explanatory.
And it gives you the little cost breakdown before you do something. Yeah. That's really cute.
I love that.
Download the private key. Yes, I will download the private key.
Sure, why not? Let's go.
Why not? Like, not that I'm ever going to log into this. Now, hopefully, because that should have deployed. Now, has she done it right? Have I deployed it into the correct? It's thinking about it. I'm hoping that I just deployed it into the US, that it should have not deployed, although it does appear to be deploying. Good times.
Maybe it'll like try. I don't know how this works. I'm not going to
love
try and
demos.
speculate. Demos are hands down the worst thing known to
They
man.
are. Well, here you can see
'Cause
how
you
not
have-
to do guardrails. There you go. So, interesting. Let's have a look. It really should have stopped that. Interesting. I love it. We'll do a bit of troubleshoot. I love a bit of trouble. Do we
Actually,
fancy
yeah,
let's do it.
Be
Fancy
super
digging
useful.
around
Let's
and
do
seeing
troubleshooting.
why it deployed?
Yes.
Honestly, here's the thing. Does this work? Does this stuff work? Yes, it does. Have I been doing demos live long enough to know that the demo gods hate everybody? Yes, I have. But now I'm intrigued. So I think I know what's happened, but let's see if I'm correct. No.
I
so
feel
you-
like
We're
though
learning
this is
something.
I feel like this is a good like demonstration of like why guardrails are really good, but also can be a little bit of a
Yes.
troublesome trouble-mite.
This is
Yeah.
true. This is true. Like I said, and it's the same with when we had application controls, like application whitelisting and stuff. I mean, it's kind of a bit like that, but for your whole cloud, right? So there's always a bit of troubleshooting. So interesting. So this has been. I know what I've done. Oh, you silly buggers! Oh, excuse me, you silly buggers, Sarah. I know exactly what I've done. So
That's not a rude word in Australia.
rude in Australia.
No.
So I will
That's
tell
term
you
of
what
endearment.
I will tell you exactly what I've done. In me deciding to pick this resource group does not have the guardrails deployed to it.
There you
Aha.
There you go.
Sarah, if anyone was watching and you saw that coming, by the way, if anyone does Azure, then I don't
Silly
like
goose.
silly person. Let's do that again, and let me do it in the correct subscription.
I
Because
guess,
that
Sarah, I have a question out
Go
of
for it.
that. I guess my question is can you deploy a policy that's like, hello, there's no policy in this region that you're trying to push something. Maybe you want to check that out because maybe that's not what you're wanting to do.
Yes. Now look, can you see already?
Aha, it stopped you before you even
Ooh.
tried.
Red text.
It's
There you
like
go.
no.
Yeah.
So I haven't put anything. I haven't actually put any text in here. But you can. Obviously, this is just a generic thing, but it has explained it actually. Azure does chuck out some decent messages. You can see here it's saying this isn't within policy, so now you can't do it. So
I think
There you
everyone
go.
in the stream hates a bad error message, and this is, I think, a good
This
one.
is actually a good error message because it links to the policy as
that's a
well.
link,
This
right?
is the
Could you open that up?
policy, so it's not terrible. So so that was my bad. I deployed into the wrong resource group, which is why it allowed it. And as we know with all these things, there's always a reason why things don't work. And that was 100% my bad. But you can see, it's saying you can't deploy to Southeast Asia because that doesn't meet the policy. So you can't do it. And computer says no. But it's, like I said, it's actually really straightforward. But going back to Beck's question about can you do policies? So policy, this is a super, super, super simple example, right? But policy can get really, really granular. If you have the maturity and you have the time and the resources to do it, in Azure policy, we have the simple, you can't do this, you can't do this, or it can just alert on it. But there's actually quite a few operators in the policy in the policy coding stuff. You can do deploy if not exists. So if you're that good and if you know your environment and you know what you want that well, you can even, if someone deletes something, policy can redeploy it if it needs to be there. It can say, wow, that doesn't exist. I'm going to actually redeploy that. Now that's getting into that's much, much, much more advanced, and you need to be pretty mature in your guardrails to do that. But if someone, I mean, obviously people shouldn't be deleting things, and there's other ways to prevent people deleting things. But if something disappears, we can have deploy if not exist, deploy if exists. There's a lot of different operators and conditions in it that mean you can get really granular and really, really tidy with it, as you build up your maturity in it. But I always like to show sort of the straightforward, don't do this to start with. And then, as time goes on, you can build it up.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So
Sorry
Go
to
on,
interrupt you, Sarah. I just want to take you away from this for a second to ask a question that we've had in the chat, because I've been sitting on it for a little bit, but it's more of a general question about guardrails. And I don't know the answer to this. Maybe some of y'all, or maybe you do, Sarah, but do you know if there's any sort of tooling or anything like that? Let me pop the question up. If I can work out how to do that.
I can pop it.
But thanks. Great. Yeah, so beyond technical controls such as policy, are there any good examples of how to visualize or easily overview guardrails? And the point about spreadsheets is, I think, well taken.
Yes.
People tend to glaze over when a spreadsheet is in front of them. I know there's probably going to be an answer for Azure, and there's probably going to be a broader answer that we might not be able to have all of the options in mind for. Is there firstly a way in Azure that we can see, like, I suppose, all of the existing guardrails, like a bit of an overview perspective? Well,
you can see all your, these are, like I said, that's probably a slightly bigger question, and I don't want to sort of.
Yeah, I think so.
So we've got policy, which you saw here. There's all the different policies, and it tells you where you're compliant, etc. But where I would go, and I might have to just pop a different demo. Just give me a sec. Let me just stop sharing, and I'll pop a different demo. Where I would advise someone, if you're using Azure, to do this is probably slightly different. Give me a sec. That's Azure policy is the engine behind it. But in Azure, we have a tool called Defender for Cloud, which used to be known, because we love a name change, which used to be called Azure Security Center, and that has a way actually works across other clouds as well. You can actually install it on the cloud, and you can install it on-prem. Lots of people. I mean, obviously, people don't assume that because it's a Microsoft thing, right? So
it's kind of like the cloud, right? Like everything is very
everything is like, this is my brand of cloud. You cannot breach the walls of this brand of cloud. So it's cool that it's
very
moving into
sneaky
others.
of them.
I will say that having switched over to Azure for like at-home infrastructure, it is one of the things that was really nice, was just how easy it was to integrate a whole bunch of third-party services and a whole bunch of third-party clouds. Like, it was just so straightforward.
Of course you have, right? Like, of course you've switched over to Azure.
This is peak back behavior.
I think there are other tools. I mean, there are other tools out there. What you want to look for is tools, and let me see if I can remember the acronym. You want to look for CSPP, Cloud Security Posture Management. No, CPSM, Cloud Security Posture Management Tools. And this is the Microsoft one. But the idea with those tools is that they do look at everything, because the thing is, right, as we all know, and it's still an assumption, right, that you're locked into one vendor, and one vendor will only look at their stuff because that's how things used to be. But I think generally, I know definitely in Microsoft, and I'd say it's fair to say other I think most vendors are going this way, but Microsoft, particularly in its security products, because we know that Microsoft had a history a while ago of like, it was Microsoft or nothing, and you had to be everything Microsoft, and there's still that misconception. Whereas, particularly in the security space, it's not a good security product if it doesn't look at everything, right? Like it's basically, and we want to get rid of the silos. So most Microsoft products now will actually integrate very nicely with other things. So you can see here, the cloud security posture management is what you want. And so you can see here, it's actually showing you Azure, AWS, GCP, and what it's showing you is it uses policy. What Defender for Cloud does, also, like I said, known as Azure, previously the product previously known as Azure Security Center. What it does is it will actually look. It has inbuilt policies, right? So let's have a look at. We'll have a look at. Let's have a look at this one. So this is just a subscription. This is an Azure subscription, but what it does is it has a load of predefined policies that are best practices. So they come from Azure best practices. They come from industry. So and basically it will score you against different things. So you can see here, there's all kinds of things in here. I keep clicking on the wrong screen. I keep looking at the screen where I'm seeing StreamYard, but I should be clicking on the other one. But you can see I mean, lots of this is common sense, and so I'll just like put it out a bit, but it's saying, MFA should be enabled. Yeah, that's a good idea. You should secure management ports. Now, this is basically policy that has been written by Microsoft, and it's basically security hygiene stuff, but you can write your own as well. And if you've written policies for guardrails, they show up in here too. And the idea is it will show you kind of how you're scoring. So you can see here, we call it secure score. It chucks it out as a percentage thing, but it will show you where you're compliant, where you're not, and but it also does it across other clouds. So you can have that view across everything, and you can even put it on-prem. So there are definitely other tools out there, but what you want to look for is anything that's cloud security, posture management, CSPM tools, because the idea is they should look across everything and give you that view. If it's a good tool, it will. And this is, like I said, this is just the Microsoft version, but you should see, and Defender for Cloud, a lot of this we don't actually charge for as well. So like a lot of it's free. So like if you're using any Azure, please go look at it.
Very cool.
It's overlooked sometimes. And I'm like, you have no reason not to use it. There are aspects of it that are licensed because of course, there are, but the general recommendations and the hygiene stuff, we don't charge for. So go have a look at it. So yeah, that's what I would recommend having a look at. 'Cause you see here,
I think the other thing that I really like about it, not that we're on a Microsoft Defender for Cloud sales pitch.
This show is not sponsored by Microsoft.
We're totally, like, as you know, probably Sarah, I don't know if you've seen other shows, we're totally vendor agnostic. We just look at cool tools and we see what's cool. And so Beck, go crazy.
One of the things that I really like about the recommendations, and again, this comes from being a security person that's not necessarily like a cloud native person, is that like the descriptions on those recommendations are really good. Like they actually tell you what the problem is and when it applies, and they give you like some decent instructions on how to fix it. And I think for me, again, like having my own Azure infrastructure that I need to also like keep secure, it's really helpful to work out what actually is a problem and what needs to be fixed immediately and what can wait.
This is sick because like in my old job, like a good portion of my job was taking recommendations like this and kind of turning them into plain English and telling people like, you should prioritize this. This is the exact command you need to run. This is the exact setting you need to change, because often people would get their, vulnerability scan reports or what have you and be like, what do I do with this information?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, well, look, you see, actually, if you click, like if we go all the way in and click on one of these, it actually...
Oh my God, it's got the tactics and techniques as well.
Yeah.
And you can even the stuff like exempt, assign owner, it's just so easy to do in the portal. It's nice. It's great. Sorry, exactly. Sarah.
No. Like I said, not sponsored by Microsoft. But like I said, as someone who has worked with other clouds, I think the Azure UI is very, very starter friendly as well. Like if you're very into the cloud, whereas I feel like the other clouds, it kind of assumes you know quite a lot already.
Yes,
not everybody does.
The other clouds, we're definitely talking about Amazon with that comment because
I mean, I've used mainly AWS and GCP, and like I like AWS because it's familiar to me, but I do admit it's not very starter friendly whatsoever. And there's a lot of disparate modules that you have to be like let's say you want to do a policy or a role or something like that. I've had situations where you assign a policy on an object, but then you also have to assign a policy on the object that it's interacting with to say that those policies are allowed to talk to each other. And sometimes I'm just like,
I always say that you've got to make things on AWS KISS before they'll actually
you have to make it KISS.
It's really weird.
You need to literally understand set theory to understand how AWS, they have a picture that basically just shows like the intersection of three policies. So you need to understand three policies, how they intersect, and then it will work. And
it's synapse.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. And the thing is, like, I mean, before I worked for Microsoft, I used to work for a company that did AWS consulting. So I have worked in AWS too. And what I found was, a lot of the customers we work with, they would bring us in to implement, to do a cloud transformation. But then we got to the end of it, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't know how to run it though. So can you run it for us too?" And it's not. Like I said, Azure's certainly not perfect, but I remember when I moved over to Microsoft, I was like, wow, this is easier to use if you don't, if you're going from scratch.
But I think this raises a really good point about, like, you have the complexity of guardrails, like, as a concept, but then you have however the platform has implemented that way of rolling them out. And I feel like if you've dealt with primarily AWS, it's not as straightforward, and so you end up with this misconception that
it's really
all
hard
guardrails are hard. I like that, and I think the only other place that I have encountered a similar problem is when it comes to rolling out guardrails in CI pipelines, where you need to get Terraform lint, you need to roll in this package, that package, and then you need to make it all work with your deployment pipeline. And it's very easy to become just disenchanted with the whole idea because it's much too difficult.
Yeah, so it's all too hard. I'm just not going to bother. I think that really, going back to our friend who left that question, I think that really goes to an important point where what is it called? CSPM tools. I think
CSPM, Cloud Security.
CSPM. Sorry, what are acronyms? It's good to have a catalog and an overview of what is. Thank you. Thanks, Lily. That's great.
It clarifies things a lot.
It's good to have a catalog of what you actually have, because one day you might deploy something and maybe you forgot to give a good error message or whatever. And you're like, why is this thing not working? And then, I've got this policy that doesn't let me do X. I think those tools, I've never heard of them before, but I do hope they become more popular because it seems like a nifty way to catalog your policies.
I think they are, and I think it's coming. Again, doing guardrails is still sort of fairly new to most organizations.
I would say so, yeah.
Right.
And there are tools out there. There's probably there's not heaps of them, and I think because people aren't doing guardrails enough yet, that there's not the same demand or the awareness for them. And I think it'll come in time. I think that's just a maturity piece for the industry, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, the maturity thing is something I wanted to ask you about. This does presuppose that you have your shit together and that you know what you have and you know where it needs to be deployed in order to put in guardrails that are useful and not irritating. Because if you don't understand the use cases that your people have, then just applying a bunch of guardrails is going to make everybody very unhappy. So when would you recommend that people do this, and how do you recommend that people get to a state where they can put guardrails in?
Yeah, now that's a really good point and a good question, because you're right. Doing guardrails really well, it provides, it assumes a level of maturity that not everybody, in fact, let's face it, the majority do not have. And I think with guardrails, I would say don't despair, start small, okay? Because even if you just say, and this is why I always use it as an example, because I think most businesses can answer this question. Where should you be deploying to in the parts of the world? Most organizations, I think, should be able to answer that question. You would assume a European, an EU organization should only be deploying in EU regions. In Australia, I would assume you probably want to stick to Australian cloud. Australian cloud regions, that kind of stuff. I think that very basic stuff people should know. Should you be letting people deploy resources with external IP addresses? Probably not. So I think there's maybe sort of 5-10 guardrails, some really, really basic ones that apply to the vast majority of organizations that you should start with. And then, it's definitely a journey, cheesy word, not like 17 or whatever, to go and actually have those conversations, because hopefully you've already got, maybe as a hangover from on-prem, some baselines and standards, and hopefully most organizations should be, or at least be thinking about, translating said standards into cloud. Now, again, that's something that not everybody does, but they should be translating that over. And then usually if you've got some standards, they can be translated into guardrails. But definitely, you're right. I mean, it's a journey. I think start really simple. Start with the stuff that you absolutely know nobody should be doing. I can think most people can probably think of 5 or 10 of them, and then build on it from there. It's definitely, I definitely don't expect, and I think it's unrealistic to be like, oh, hello, random organization. Well, you should have at least 357 policies from the word go and guardrails.
Yeah. It's not sustainable. It's not reasonable. And it's kind of like what you pointed out. Like you said, oh, this is so simple. People should know this. Make sure that MFA is enabled. Like, it sounds dumb and we all know. Just add it. Just put it in there.
And also, the good thing is also just go and look at like CIS standards. Like, also go look at industry baseline standards. Obviously, again, not every organization can use every single little standard, but use those as like a baseline and say, hey, we're gonna adopt this. And like I said, in Defender for Cloud that we just looked at, that's got a load of out of the box things as well. And other tools also have out of the box things. So if you don't know where to start, I know sometimes people are like, oh, well, out of the box, like I need to write my own. But if you have got nothing, start with out of the box. Because
simple stuff.
Start with the simple stuff. It's stuff that usually applies to pretty much everybody. Start with that. And then as you understand your environment, as you get more mature, you can build on it with stuff that's specific to your organization. But if you've got nothing, I don't think you've got the right to turn your nose up at out of the box, which I have seen before. And I think sometimes it's more of a point of pride. Again, going back to feelings and psychology, it's like a point of pride that people are like, no, we need to write our own. That's not good enough for our standards. And it's like, but if you have
nothing,
you have nothing. So start with something and then adapt it.
I've been in 2 SOCs that have been like, starting from nothing. Like, both of the SOCs that I've worked in have kind of started with nothing. And that's the exact journey we went on. It was like, okay, turn on the out of the box stuff first, see how that goes. Then take stock of what else you need to do. Learn from incidents as well. Maybe you don't know that you shouldn't be doing something unless you have an incident. Grab that action item and be like, maybe there should be a policy for that. And then as you go, you start mapping out and threat modeling and thinking about what you should also be adding. And I personally have found it quite helpful to turn things on in detect mode first, see what's going on.
Yeah.
If I turn this on in detect mode, is it noisy? Is stuff happening? Am I misunderstanding how the business works? And then once you realize that it's like not super noisy and you definitely shouldn't be doing it, just like whack it on. And just baby steps, like you said, like you start small and just like add more and add more. Sorry, Becky.
Detect or audit, whatever you call it, like always have it in the non-intrusive mode to start with for a little bit.
I was going to say exactly that, because we do that with like content security policy as well to stop things from just breaking. But I think the other thing that I often see is too many businesses are like, we are going to spend 3 months rolling out all of our guardrails and then it's finished, it's done. And it's like, no, that's not how this works.
No more guardrails after that.
Yeah, it's like
fixed security. Well done, everyone. Go home.
An iterative process that needs to be constantly like maintained and groomed. And like you can definitely do the like out of the box writing rules. Those can definitely be like, we're going to spend a couple of months doing that and focusing on it. But at some point it needs to just become a normal operational process that you work through. But sorry, Lily, I interrupted you.
No, it's all good. So I had a question about setting this up in terms of inside Azure. What kinds of roles does Azure have that let people create guardrails and undo guardrails? Because also just thinking about this from like an offensive point of view, one of the things I'd be wanting to do if I got into an environment like this is if I see guardrails in place, I'm like, cool, well, which users can then disable those or change those or create malicious ones?
And I love how you've just gone, back to Sarah's screen for her to show us.
Well, no, I legitimately would like to know, like,
Yeah.
so if I am trying to hack Azure, where do I go? Can you please show me?
Show me no crimes. Where's the no crimes counter? Oh my god, we
hang
need to
on.
find out.
Show me how to hack Azure now. Please, let's do it.
Go.
Please and thank you.
Obviously, when we're talking about permissions in Azure, we're always talking about Azure AD. That's because that's where all our permissions are. So, and you may know we have many rules. In fact,
Yes, had noticed that.
In fact, we will actually have to go back to
There's
this.
so many rules.
So many.
So much room for activities.
Yeah. In fact, it's a very good question though, because something that we hear sometimes about Azure AD and why people don't do their permissions, because of course, we of course encourage the principle of least privilege, of course, is because there's too many permissions and roles and it gets confusing and people don't know what to do. So they just give themselves quite high access because
I see it a lot. Yeah.
than working it out. So, so what you would be needing is a role, and I am not. Let's have a look, because actually, off the top of my head, you know what? Because as you can see, this is my personal demo. So as you can see, I am global admin, of course. My own
Tasty.
demo. Yeah, I know, spicy.
Now we know who to go after.
Yeah.
If you get any strange emails, Sarah, after this, don't click.
Yeah, I know. So that's interesting because I am not, and then you can see right now I'm actually having a look. Authentication policy, it's none of those.
What about guardrails?
It's
Cuckoo clock, love it.
The policy, the product is called policy, so I would be assuming it's under there. This is going to really annoy me now. What would it be?
Oh, this is my fault for asking an unscripted question. I'm sorry.
And no, that's fine, because now you know what, that stuff's gonna really annoy me, because now I'm like, what would the role be called? It may be the owner of the subscription. I have a feeling it might come under subscription owner, actually. So for those of you unfamiliar with, this probably won't even come out as a role. Basically, no, it won't do in here. So basically, for those of you, I'm pretty sure, though, anyone who is maybe Googling in the background, binging, of course, in the background.
How dare you call me out? I am definitely Googling /binging /duck going this in the background.
I'm pretty sure it will be I'm pretty sure it's going to be the subscription owner. And subscription owners can kind of do anything because we apply it to a subscription. I am like 99% sure without checking that's where the permission comes in, rather than it being a role for a specific product. That's what I believe. But you are right. So if you did get enough, obviously with global admin in my particular demo I have here, I can do anything because it is my demo. But of course, you're right. You should be, this would be, if you were an offensive person, I mean, yeah, you'd be looking at, if you wanted to change policy. I mean, if you got as far as subscription owner, you could do so. You probably wouldn't be bothering with your policy at that point in your guardrails, because you could do some other things. You could do plenty of other things at that level. You'd probably be doing some other fun or not fun things, depending on how it is, that you could do if you'd managed to escalate your privilege. But the thing that we do have in Azure that's probably worth calling out here as a thing is PIM, or privileged information privilege identity management. So basically,
you just made Beck very happy.
Yeah, PIM. We love PIM. So PIM, in short, again, there's other products that do the same thing. There are other tools that can do the same thing, but it prevents you from having standing access to anything. So you have to go in. So there is no standing access. So if you configure PIM properly, so everyone has like very baseline level, and say you wanted to use your permissions as the subscription owner, you would have to request it through PIM, and then someone who is higher than you authorizes it, or who is approved as one of the approvers authorizes that access, and then you are granted it for a specified time window. And that can be half an hour, an hour, a couple of hours.
That's sick.
I
That's
love
sick. That's really
I
cool.
Yeah.
I
And then
love
it goes
part of
away
it.
again. So the idea is that there is no standing access. So even me as a global admin here, because the fact is someone needs to have global admin, someone somewhere, some people, because sometimes I think we do the conversation wrong about identity, because the fact is insecurity, because we talk about high level of privileges being a really bad thing, but the fact is they do need to exist in a functioning organization.
Yeah.
Someone has to have that privilege. Of course, as few people as possible should have it, but people need to have it. Like you can't get rid of it. So PIM is the way that you remove that standing access. So if an account is compromised, that person, that attacker, that malicious actor, if they try and elevate and start doing things that require increased privilege, it will say, hang on a second. Yes, we know this account has this privilege, but somebody else needs to authorize your use of that privilege. And so it's an additional control. And it shouldn't be, it's not, PIM in Azure is pretty frictionless. I mean, of course, you have the right people set up to authorize that. So you can't have someone that's not here most of the time, or, it needs to be someone who you can get hold of to get it in a timely fashion. But it does mean that if that account is compromised, there's another step they have to go through before they can start abusing that privilege. And I think PIM is awesome, and it's not talked about enough. And again, there are other tools that do it as well out there, but it's just that restrict that standing high privilege, that it's not there all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that, like, in organizations I've worked in, like, those just-in-time permissions exist, but I did not know that there were products that had that kind of built in, and you didn't have to extend that yourself or build some kind of permissions engine or something like that around it. So that's really cool.
It's always been really interesting, because when like PIM was starting to become easier to use in Microsoft, you saw Netflix like releasing their like just-in-time access controls for like AWS, where you have to roll out this controller and then there's additional infrastructure. And it was just really neat that it was provided by Microsoft out of the box. I think the Terraform registries for it are still a little bit behind, but because like you can configure it in the UI, it does somewhat make it painless if you're at least having to set it up for the first time. I think it's just real neat, because it's like you go.
I was just going to say, like, I just like when security is made easy. It's the paved road that we talk about. That's another buzzword for you all, where the right way is the easiest way. And if you give someone the ability to request elevated permissions to do something real quick, then they don't need global admin every time, because they can just do something really quick. I was just going to mention as well, I did some internet searching on an unspecified search engine, and I think I found the role that can let you manage policies. I think it's called Resource Policy Contributor, but I don't know. That was like the first link that I found. Maybe look for that. I don't know. The word contributor.
I think going on from the stuff about PIM as well, I think one of the other neat things is there's also just-in-time access for bastions and like SSHing into different boxes in Azure. And that's also really nice, because it comes out of the box. And I think in its own way, while it's not defined as a policy, it's another guardrail that you can roll out. So you do give people the ability to like SSH into certain hosts, but that access isn't always available. So when you are doing, like, if you're doing recon on hosts, they're never exposing that these ports are available. And I feel like besides the policy, there are these other like little guardrails that are littered through different parts of Azure that you don't really know about until you start using it and deploying that particular type of infrastructure.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, Beck, because in fact, just-in-time is also...
Here's what I prepared earlier.
So just-in-time actually also exists we have just in time for servers. So like at the network level. So there's just in time in Azure AD at the identity level, and then Defender for Cloud. It's one of the add-on bits you can get. Does it for VMs as well. So again, you can only expose like ports from the VM at certain times. Like,
Okay, that's cool.
So we do it. It's on like multiple levels as well. You have just in time at the identity. You have just in time at the infrastructure level. So again, it's just layers and layers and layers of controls. And I mean, there's so much stuff here, right? And I know, like, obviously, I think there's so much stuff, and I think people just aren't always aware, and people are busy, right? There's so many tools that make this stuff quite easy now as well, compared to what it used to be. And again, whether it's a Microsoft tool, whether it's another tool, there's a lot of tools that automate this stuff to make it easy to do, because as we've said, if it's not easy to do, people don't do it because it's too hard. And you need to make the right thing to do the easy thing to do. So it's something that you can do in Defender for Cloud as well at that network level. So we have an absolute ton of stuff, but I think it's definitely worth and it is sort of guardrail as well. It's all just layers of controls. I think something that's really important if you're like moving into cloud, I mean, everyone's moving into cloud, right? Or you're already there, is to like just go and like review the kind of tools that are out there, because I'm not saying you have to go and buy loads of stuff, but go and see what's out there, because the field is moving and changing so quickly, and things are getting easier, that something that used to be really hard 3 or 4 years ago might be relatively straightforward now. Like the other one that I think have a lot of completely different subject, and we won't go there, information protection and data classification. That used to be impossible, right? Because someone would literally have to manually go through and go blah, 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 blah. Whereas now there's all kinds of tools that will look at your data, search it, and look for like certain things like credit card numbers, social security numbers, anything like ID numbers, and it will just automatically classify it for you.
The only one I know of, I think, is Amazon Macy, which I think looks in your S3 buckets for PII or something like that. But don't quote me on that because I haven't used it. But it's insane that there's stuff like that out there that kind of does all that for you. And I think I'm going to put a twinkle in Beck's eye when I talk about threat modeling. I think it's really important if there's all of these tools that are available to you and you just don't even know where to start. You're like, oh my God, what's going on? Have a think about like what your attack surface looks like and prioritize the tools that you need to I guess enable and start there. Like you don't have to turn everything on. You can just put stuff in that's specific to what your crown jewels are and then work back from there.
I think the same thing goes for, as you were saying, incidents, like doing a 5 whys and like getting to that point of why was it deployed? And it's like, well, because no one said that you couldn't deploy it. It's like, okay, well, that's great. This could probably have been prevented with a guardrail of some sort. I think guardrails are good. I like them. Big fan. 10 out of 10.
Summary of the stream, guardrails good.
At first, I was like, what is all this guardrail stuff? Like, I genuinely didn't know. Like, I know about policies and, like, all this stuff, but I think a lot of people hear guardrails and they're like, oh, it's going to be something that's going to make me not able to do my work. But when you think about it, it kind of just greases the wheels. It makes your life easier, and you don't have to be scared, like me and Beck,
Sarah,
when we deploy infrastructure.
Sarah, what kind of resources would you recommend people look at for guardrails if they want to start implementing this stuff, besides this, video, which is going to be an amazing resource, I'm sure?
I mean, I would start, again, all the cloud providers have loads of material for the different products. So depending on what cloud you're in, there's so much Microsoft stuff. Like I would definitely go look at like your cloud providers platform stuff to start with. I'd also go and look at, particularly because I think the concept of guardrails, I think, is pretty straightforward for most people to follow. It's what your guardrails should be that's the hard bit. So I would go and look at like things like the CIS standards. I think that's a good place to start. As I said, lots of products have them out of the box, but go and have a look at those sort of standards so you can understand the kind of baselines there. And like I said, specifically Microsoft, because, work for Microsoft. We have a lot of Azure security best practices. We have cloud adoption frameworks, all security things, all of that sort of, it's all free material. You don't have to be a Microsoft customer to even look at it. It's all online. Go and check those sort of things out to get an idea, because I think the main thing is not how to implement the guardrails. It's relatively straightforward. You can just look up the product and follow the things. But what you need to do is what you implement. That's the thing that I think is the thing that people should read up on more, because it's the heart of it.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a bit of a tricky trap there for people as well. I see people fall into this all the time, where it's like, because they can't solve all of their problems with like one tool or one effort, they solve none of them. So it feels to me, it's like, like Azure has some really great things. So it's like, if you use Azure, you're well served for setting up guardrails. I've also been asking Jeeves whilst we've been talking about CSPM tools. And, there's a ton of stuff out there for Kubernetes, for example. And like, you might not find one tool that does Azure and Kubernetes in like a single pane of glass. I'm sure there's a startup that is thinking about doing that somewhere, but it feels like one of those things. It's like, if you actually just start with the stuff with the most impact, right? Like if your biggest threat comes from exposing, 0.0.0/0 SSH to the internet with password authentication and all this sort of like really low hanging fruit kind of stuff. That's a buzzword. You could maybe start there and just enable this for Azure, and then you're in a better place than you were. Start thinking about other tools. So
I think you raised a really good point about security engineers and what we tend to do, where we get analysis paralysis or like perfectionism, where we go, this thing isn't perfect and it's not going to mitigate all the threats, so I'm just not going to do anything about it, because it's too much. And I don't know why, but my brain has this like thing in it that likes to take big problems and break them down into little steps. So I've always been the weird odd one out, being like, just do this, and then people are like, just but it's not perfect. It's not going to fix everything. Totally. I'm like, but it's better than nothing. So just do this, and then build the blocks.
That's the way.
And I think like you mentioned, Sarah, most of us had this feeling early on in our careers, where we're like, security is black and white. Objectively, this thing is bad, and it's like, well, yes, this thing is bad. What's the likelihood of this thing going wrong? What's the cost versus the cost of like not deploying and like not meeting our targets? What's the severity if this thing goes wrong? And also, can we put in guardrails around said stuff to say, like you were saying, Lily, if an attacker was to get into a cloud account, where can they go from there? So it's like, you're not plugging all the holes, but you're just making it's the pyramid of pain. I'm going to use my CTI stuff to say pyramid of pain. You're just going to make things harder, right? Like, you're never going to be perfect, but you just want to make things that much more difficult so that people go, screw this, I'm going somewhere else. This is boring. I'm going to go find an unauthenticated API exposed to the internet.
And I mean, I think the other thing is like, it's not always feasible to like remediate a vulnerability or put in like enough mitigating controls to make a risk acceptable, but an observed risk is always easier to deal with than an unobserved risk, because suddenly you know when it's happening, you know when the like tripwire is being tripped, and you can actually action that rather than just being like, everything is fine, it's okay, no logs, no crime.
Yeah,
we've never been hacked.
My most hated. PCAPA, it didn't happen. I don't want to hear that ever again.
Well, good job on that note. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much for coming and talking to us about guardrails, for showing us how we can implement this kind of stuff, and also for digging into some of the issues about the things that we need to make sure that guardrails are actually the right thing for us at the right time. This was super informative, and we're really excited to have had you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to say that we haven't even had any dog discussions, but there is a dog.
I will leave a message in the chat because I saw a Shibi doing yoga. in the background, and so I saw a real big stretch, and I felt the need to say, "Ooh, big stretch," but I didn't. So
Yeah.
please apologize.
It's all right. That is required when dogs do stretches. But
Yeah.
The real big
have to say
stretches
it.
here are the assumptions we made along the way.
Yeah.
No. And there you
I
see,
love
there's another dog. If I just move that,
Such beautiful peperinos.
I know.
If you are watching and you join the Discord channel, we do have a Grayson emoji now. So I'm just letting you know you can use Grayson whenever you want to satisfy all of your emoticon needs.
You can
Just
manifest
saying.
Grace on.
Brilliant.
Gonna say I don't know where Grayson is at the moment. That's my third dog. Gonna say, where are you, Gray? He's somewhere. He's around. He's under the
In
weather
the
today.
Discord, hanging out.
Yeah,
he's
for
gone
sure.
back to sleep. I think. Poor little man isn't very well today.
Oh, sweetie boy.
No
Well,
good.
Thank you again, Sarah, for coming along, talking to us about Guardrails. We're going to leave it there for today. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully you, like I, learned something new. Next time on the OWASP DevSlop Show, we are actually going to be doing one of our after-hours sessions, which is going to be next Thursday, October 3rd at 7 p.m. No, it's November 3rd. My goodness, time. November the 3rd at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. And we are going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. We're going to be talking about breaches. We're going to be talking about RCs. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things. And we do not put this one up on YouTube, so you're going to have to catch it live or not see it at all. So come along to Twitch then, and we'll be chatting with you there about all the latest and greatest in the world of security. Have a great
Thank
one.
you so much.
And yeah, take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.